Hello, and welcome back to Sunset Salutations. I'm Kristin Devine Jones, and I'm so glad that you've carved out 30 minutes of your day today to find some Zen. I'm so pleased to introduce our new text. This is 10% Happier by Dan Harris. I love how he calls the book How I Tamed the Voice in My Head, Reduced Stress Without Losing My Mind, and Found Self-Help That Actually Works. A true story. Dan Harris. So I'm going to summarize a little bit of this as I feel the context will help us to benefit from it as much as we can. So Dan Harris was a newscaster for ABC News. He spent much of his career in war zones. When he came back to the news desk on a day that he was covering for Robin Roberts, he had a minor panic attack that was televised. And he had been struggling for a long time with anxiety and negative thoughts, and he had been fighting through it, which actually fuels a lot of those thoughts and feelings. So, in the wake of a televised panic attack, a few of his thoughts here from the chapter called Air Hunger before we kind of dive in to his exploration and his journey to find mindfulness. My modus operandi was inherited from my father, whose motto was, "The price of security is insecurity." We're going to come back to that idea last. I'm going to read that one more time and give you a moment to digest it. The price of security is insecurity. I took my dad's maxim very much to heart. Straight from childhood, I was a frequent mental inventory taker, scanning my consciousness for objects of concern, kind of like pressing a bruise to see if it still hurts. In my view, the balance between stress and contentment was life's biggest riddle. On the one hand, I was utterly convinced that the continuation of any success I had achieved was contingent upon persistent hypervigilance. I figured this kind of behavior must be adaptive from an evolutionary standpoint. Cavemen who worried about possible threats, real or imagined, probably survived longer. On the other hand, I was keenly aware that while this kind of insecurity might prolong life, it also made it less enjoyable. I was ruthlessly self-critical. I was willing to work nights, mornings, and weekends, even if it meant skipping important events, such as friends, weddings, and family gatherings, in order to get on the air. So while the concept of getting on the air might not be relevant to all of us, we may be able to translate it into our own lives by the ambition that we feel within our careers. Whatever it is that you're pursuing, how you pursue it, that sort of push forward no matter what energy, his version of air hunger. So this is a continuation from that chapter. He had just been out on assignment in Afghanistan for his first big foreign coverage, and he comes back and he writes this. When I got back to New York, I was greeted with a public repudiation in the New York Times. The foreign desk decided to give me a second chance, sending me this time to Tora Bora, where Osama bin Laden was holed up and under assault by local Afghan warlords on the American payroll. On this assignment, I redeemed myself. Part of what turned things around for me was a scene captured on video where I was shooting a stand-up, the part of a news story where the reporter speaks directly to the camera. I was perched on the side of a mountain, and right in the middle of my spiel, there was a whistling sound overhead. I had never heard gunfire up close before, so it took me a second to realize what was happening and dive to the ground. There was nothing warm or fuzzy about this. My bosses ate it up. My immediate thought as that bullet whizzed over was, I hope we're rolling on this. I read you this passage because I sympathize greatly with this idea of being in a situation and having it colored so fully by my personal perception that perhaps I would put myself in danger in the name of achieving a goal. And maybe that's something that you relate to too. And that's a pattern that can lead us down a path that, as he explained in the previous section, might lead us away from a happy lifestyle, a happy mindset. So he continues to discuss his career for the next few chapters of the book, and it's concise and well written and made me laugh. And also, I err more towards the side of skepticism than natural belief in things like mindfulness. It took me a really long time to accept or believe that training my mind to be present a little bit every day would yield any kind of benefit whatsoever. I started this practice at Lawrenceville. I was a part of the dance program, and Mr. Wilder would have us meditate every day. And I'm sure if you ask him, he will let you know that I whined about it. I always wanted to leave during that 5 minutes. I would just sit there stirring, trying to think about how I could have been using that 5 minutes more productively towards my work. And years later now, I really find this to be sort of a saving grace of my mental state. And I really hope that the practice can offer as much to you as it has for me in my life. So this is a longer snippet here before we get into our alignment. By the time his book arrived at my apartment, I had almost forgotten about Eckhart Tolle. I saw the cheesy orange cover shining dually through Amazon's irrationally excessive bubble wrap. It bore the rather overwrought title, A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose, as well as the seal of Oprah's book club. I propped it on my chest that night, and unsuspecting Bianca, his wife, sleeping to my left, blissfully unaware that her future husband was being sucked into a strange vortex. At first, the book struck me as irredeemable poppycock. I was put off by the strained stateliness of Tolle's writing, as well as its nearly indecipherable turgidity. How could Oprah fans stand to drink from a fire hose of jargon like conditioned mind structures and the one indwelling consciousness? What's more, the guy was stunningly grandiose. He referred to his book as a transformational device and promised that, as you read, a shift takes place within you. I lay there, rolling my eyes, quietly cursing Felicia for inflicting this upon me. But just when I thought I'd been defeated by all the porridge about inner opening and the impending shift in planetary consciousness, a clearing appeared in the spiritual thicket. Tolle began to unfurl a fascinating thesis, one that made me think that he must have somehow spent an enormous amount of time inside my skull. Our entire lives, he urged, are governed by a voice in our heads. This voice is engaged by a ceaseless stream of thinking, most of it negative, repetitive, and self-referential. It squawks away at us from time to time. And the minute we open our eyes in the morning until the minute we fall asleep, it does not allow us Our entire lives, he argued, are governed by a voice in our heads. This voice is engaged in a ceaseless stream of thinking, most of it negative, repetitive, and self-referential. It squawks away at us from the minute we open our eyes in the morning until the minute we fall asleep at night, if it allows us to sleep at all. Talk, talk, talk. The voice is constantly judging and labeling everything in its field of vision. Its targets aren't just external. It often viciously taunts us, too. Apparently, Felicia was right when she got all flustered on that little side street in Jersey City. Tolle wasn't using the term ego the way most of us normally do. He wasn't referring solely to pride, conceit, the variety often displayed by people who appear on television for a living, nor was he using it in the Freudian sense as the psychological mechanism that mediates between our id and our superego, our desires and our morality. He meant something much larger. According to Tolle, the ego is our inner narrator, our sense of I. Certainly Tolle had described my mind to a T. While I had never really thought about it before, I suppose I'd always assumed that the voice in my head was me, my ghostly internal anchorman, hosting the coverage of my life, engaged in an unsolicited stream of insensitive questions and obnoxious color commentary. Per Tolle, even though the voice is the ridgepole of our interior lives, most of us take it completely for granted. He argued that the failure to recognize thoughts for what they are, quantum bursts of psychic energy that exist solely in your head, is the primordial human error. When we are unaware of the egoic mind, egoic being a word he appears to have invented, we blindly act out our thoughts. And often the results are not pretty. I began to recall some of the many brilliant suggestions the voice in my head had made to me over the years. You're right to be angry at that producer. Throw your papers in the air. That Pakistani protester is way out of line. Even though he's surrounded by 1,000 angry friends, you should have a shouting match with him. I'd been reading for an hour, and Tolle had my full attention. As I turned the pages, he began to list some of the ego's signature moves, many of which seemed to be grabbed directly from my behavioral repertoire. The ego is never satisfied. No matter how much stuff we buy, no matter how many arguments we win or delicious meals we consume, the ego never feels complete. Did this not describe my bottomless appetite for airtime? Is this what my friend Simon meant when he said I have the soul of a junkie? The ego is constantly comparing itself to others. It has us measuring our self-worth against the looks, wealth, and social status of everyone else. Did this not explain some of my worrying at work? The ego thrives on drama. It keeps our old resentments and grievances alive through compulsive thought. Is this why I would sometimes come home to Bianca scowling over some issue at the office? Perhaps the most powerful Tollean insight into the ego was that it is obsessed with the past and the future, at the expense of the present. We live almost exclusively through memory and anticipation, he wrote. We wax nostalgic for prior events during which we doubtlessly were ruminating or projecting. We cast forward to future events during which we will certainly be fantasizing. But as Tolle pointed out, it is quietly, literally always now. He liked to capitalize the word now. The present moment is all we've got. We experienced everything in our past through the present moment, and we will experience everything in the future the same way. I was a pro, I realized, at avoiding the present. A ringer. This had been my true, whole life. My mom always described me as an impatient kid, rushing through everything. In 8th grade, an ex-girlfriend told me, when you have one foot in the future and the other in the past, you piss on the present. Now as a grown-up, in the deadline-dominated world of news, I was always hurtling headlong through the day, checking things off my to-do list, constantly picturing completion instead of calmly and carefully enjoying the process. The unspoken assumption behind most of my forward momentum was that whatever was coming next would definitely be better. Only when I reached the ineffable whatever would I be totally satisfied. Some of the only times I would recall being fully present were when I was in a war zone. No wonder one begot the other. It finally hit me that I'd been sleepwalking through much of my life, swept along on a tide of automatic, habitual behavior. All of the things I was most ashamed of in recent years could be explained through the ego, chasing the thrill of war without contemplating the consequences, getting carried away with anxiety about work, neglecting Bianca to tryst with my BlackBerry, obsessing about my stupid hair, It was a little embarrassing to read a self-help writer and think, this guy gets me. But it was in this moment, lying in bed late at night, that I realized that the voice in my head, the running commentary that had dominated my field of consciousness since I could remember, was kind of an a-hole. So I'd love to take a moment here just to scan through our day, make an inventory of all the times that our minds were kind of a-holes, and take a break from that time for the rest of this meditation and really enable ourselves and enjoy the present. So we are going to do a quick release of the neck before we get started here. Take a deep breath in, all the way up, release through the spine, find your arm up in the air and release it over the neck. Deep breath in, and send your fingers out. Good. Flex that arm. Bring it behind you and in front of you, behind you and in front of you. Beautiful. And reach the other arm up to the sky. Good. And find light pressure. We're not pulling, we're not yanking. Just allowing the weight to fall upon the ear. Good. And reaching that right hand out, finger by finger by finger. Good. Making sure that your spine is very tall here. Excellent. Now flex that hand. Send it forward and back. Forward and back. This is an incredibly glamorous one. We're just going to roll our head to the front. Good. And you're going to pull your head back. All the way forward and pull the head back. All the way forward and pull the head back. Awesome. That one's really good if you've been spending a lot of time, like most of us have, on screens. Great. Now, I want you to find a moment to take your seat. If you are already sitting, get yourself resituated. Make yourself comfortable. Take a deep breath in. Elongate the spine. Good. Just take a deep breath out. And find weight in your pelvis and sit bones. Beautiful. Take a deep breath in. And release tension on the exhale. Good. Allowing your eyes to close here. Starting at the crown of the head. Take an inventory of the tension within your body. See what you release here. Beautiful. And take a deep breath in. And release. Now remembering that breathing is not an activity. It will happen without effort. Shift your focus from doing to noticing. If it helps you to utilize a mantra, breathe in, ease. Breathe out, relax. Breathe in, ease. Breathe out, relax. Finding that mantra helps me to bring my shoulders down my back, trust my skeletal structure, finding that my muscles are not needed in this posture. Finding dignity here. When the mind begins to wander, which it inevitably will, allow yourself to return to the breath. When you feel ready, find your consciousness back in the room, back in your body. Feel the touch of the air against your skin. And slowly open your eyes, wiggling your fingers and toes. Thank you so much for joining me for Sunset Salutations today. May we continue to set aside time to train our minds to enjoy the present.